10 years of marriage, and my husband had never once taken me to a party with him. Not until his company's holiday dinner, where I left all the foreign guests speechless by speaking fluently in 8 languages. 10 years. If a person's life is a bolt of fabric, I had cut out the most beautiful, vibrant section to sew a thick dish towel for the man named Julian. I was standing in front of the large oval mirror, a mirror imported from Italy that Julian himself had chosen when we moved into this sprawling house in Greenwich, Connecticut. The mirror reflected a 5-year-old woman with a face that still held delicate features but with eyes clouded by resignation. I was wearing a beige, high-necked knit dress that fell below my knees. It was the kind of attire Julian called decent. To me, it felt more like a shroud, wrapping up the last vestiges of my vitality. The bedroom door swung open without a knock. No one ever knocked in this house for the last 10 years. Julian came in, bringing with him a mix of expensive cologne and the cold scent of tobacco. He looked at me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe like a merchant appraising clearance goods. "Are you planning on wearing that rag to the company dinner?" His voice was low, not loud, but each word pierced my ears like a thorn. I lowered my head, my hand fidgeting with a fold in the dress. "I think it's elegant and warm," I mumbled. "Elegant?" Julian let out a scornful laugh. He came closer and adjusted the collar of my dress, but his gesture was so rough, it felt like he was trying to strangle me. "You're no different from those fishmongers from the old Fulton Market who hit the lottery. Do me a favor and remember that tonight's dinner is at the Apex Club at 1 Vanderbilt. The guests are all European partners, the elite. If you're coming as an ornament, at least be a decent one. Don't make me look ridiculous for marrying someone from the sticks." I remained silent, a silence I had perfected over 3,650 days. I wasn't always like this. At 25, I had a sharp tongue, capable of debating face-to-face with linguistics professors in 3 languages. I never knew the meaning of the word submission, but 10 years with Julian had meticulously polished me, pruning my thorns, wearing down my edges, turning me into a smooth pebble that stayed wherever it was placed. He tossed a gold-edged invitation and an elongated velvet box onto the vanity. "Wear this necklace, and remember this, Eleanor. Your only mission tonight is to smile, nod, and stay quiet. Above all, do not open your mouth to say anything stupid. Your high school level English would only give them a reason to laugh at me. Don't embarrass me." He turned and left without waiting for my reply. The sound of his heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden staircase. I picked up the velvet box. Inside lay a dazzling diamond necklace. It was beautiful, but cold. He claimed the outside world would hurt me, so he locked me in this house, cutting off all my ties with old friends and colleagues. He said I didn't know how to socialize, that my English was terrible, so it was best for me to stay home and manage the meals while he went out to battle and bring in the money. I smiled bitterly, a crooked smile in the mirror. Julian didn't know, or pretended to forget, that before I was Mrs. Thorne, I was Eleanor, the walking encyclopedia. I opened the bottom drawer of the closet, where I kept tightly sealed, moisture-proof bags. I took out an old wooden box with a worn lid. Inside were not jewels but my treasures, a master's degree in linguistics from Heidelberg University in Germany, a top-level UN. Simultaneous interpreter certification, photos with diplomatic delegations from Japan, Russia, Italy, and my faded ID badge from the NGO to which I had dedicated my youth. My fingers slid over the German words on my summa cum laude diploma. I hadn't used it in 10 years. 10 years of letting the dust of time cover my intellect in exchange for the title of devoted wife, the pillar of the home. Julian had brainwashed me, instilling the idea that I was useless, a freeloader. Sometimes I even started to believe it, that I was nothing more than an ignorant housewife who needed her husband's money to buy a bunch of parsley at the supermarket. But tonight, seeing the invitation to a dinner with the H&G Corporation, an illustrious name in German industry, my heart skipped a beat. H&G, a name that reminded me of sleepless nights, translating technical manuals, of days in the interpretation booth, my back soaked in sweat but my spirit ecstatic. I put the wooden box back in its place, pushing it deep into the back. In the dim light, I put on the diamond necklace. It felt as heavy as a shackle. I applied a bit of red lipstick, a deep shade, not too flashy, but enough to hide my pale lips. Julian wanted me to be a discreet shadow, a backdrop for him. I would grant him his wish. I would go, sit in silence like a doll in a display case, but I wanted to see how my husband, the successful New York businessman, would handle the old wolves from Germany, accustomed as he was to his new money tricks. I walked out of the room and slammed the door shut. The sharp click of the latch announced a night that would not be quiet. The gleaming black Mercedes S-Class glided smoothly through the bustling streets of New York City in the final days of the year. The holiday spirit was everywhere. Bright lights and decorations, people hurrying to and fro, but inside the car, the air was dense, as heavy as an impending storm. Julian drove, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to the rhythm of the classical music playing from the expensive speakers. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the road, but he continued his lecture. When we get there, don't leave my left side. When I shake someone's hand, you just give a slight nod as a greeting. Don't you dare extend your hand to imitate them. Your hands are rough and always clammy. You'd kill their appetite. I was shrunk in the passenger seat, my hands on my knees, my gaze lost out the window. The streetlights flew by like sad, fleeting stars. I remember, I replied curtly. And another thing? In a little while, Chloe will come to greet us. She's my new assistant, very efficient. Don't give me any of your ridiculous small-town jealousy. She's an educated person. She's been abroad, has civilized manners, not like your mother's neighbors. Chloe. The name was pronounced with an unusual tone of respect. I didn't know her, but my woman's intuition told me she was more than a simple subordinate. On Julian's credit card statements, which I had secretly checked last month, there were strange charges at luxury women's boutiques, places Julian had never taken me. The car stopped in front of the main entrance of One Vanderbilt. The opulence and splendor of the skyscraper were overwhelming. Gentlemen in elegant suits and ladies in flowing evening gowns moved as if in a ballet. Julian got out, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked around the car to open my door, a gallant gesture, but I knew it was pure theater for the crowd. He offered his hand, and I placed mine in his. His hand was cold and damp. "Remember what I told you?" he hissed through his teeth, while his smile to the crowd remained radiant. "Julian! Julian! You're here!" A sing-song voice emerged from the crowd. A young woman, vibrant as a velvet rose, approached. She wore a daring crimson dress with a slit that revealed endless legs and porcelain skin, her hair voluminous and wavy, her face perfectly made up. "This must be Chloe," she said. She glided to Julian's side with complete naturalness and flicked an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder. "You're 3 minutes late. Mr. Richter is waiting for you in the VIP lounge." Then she turned to look at me. Her gaze flickered over me, pausing on my beige knit dress with a hint of concealed mockery. "Hello, Eleanor. You look so simple today. For a second, I thought you were the housekeeper who'd gotten into the wrong car." The half-joking, half-serious line was accompanied by a little giggle. Julian showed no intention of defending me. On the contrary, he laughed with her. "My wife is like that, used to the rustic life. You have to understand her. Come on, let's go in. We don't want this deal to slip through our fingers." With that, he pulled his hand from mine so Chloe could take his arm. They walked together, forming a radiant and perfect couple, as if they were the true hosts of the party. And I, the legitimate wife, was relegated a few steps behind, following them meekly like a servant. An indescribable bitterness seized my throat. 10 years of my youth, 10 years sacrificing my career, 10 years in the background, only to receive this public contempt. We entered the elevator. The confined space reeked of Chloe's cloying perfume. She chattered on, briefing Julian on the situation, peppering her speech with English words pronounced with a pretentious accent. "This deal is super important. Mr. Richter is very tough. We have to be flexible." I huddled in a corner of the elevator, listening to her every word. Deal, tough, flexible basic words she mispronounced, her intonation saccharine, yet Julian nodded in approval as if listening to a divine edict. "Chloe, you're a rock star." Thank God I have you. The interpreter I hired for tonight has me worried. The kid just graduated from college. Don't you worry, Julian. I'm here to support you. My English is good enough for socializing, and for the technical stuff, we have the interpreter. Besides, the important thing is the attitude, you know? The elevator doors opened onto the top floor. A brilliant, golden light flooded everything. The clinking of glasses, the soft music, the murmur of conversations. This was Julian's world, the world he had always been proud of and had forbidden me from entering. He turned and pointed to a round table hidden behind a large column, far from the main stage. Sit there. It's a quiet spot. You can eat in peace. Don't wander around and bother the guests. I'll call you when the party's over. He spoke as if giving an order to a mischievous child. I looked at the empty, lonely table in the corner, then at Chloe, who clung to Julian's arm as they headed to the center of the party, where the lights shone brightest. Yes, I know, I replied with surprising calmness. I walked to that secluded corner and sat down. But my eyes weren't on the plate of food. They followed every move of Julian and Chloe. More importantly, I watched the group of foreigners in the most prominent position. The tall man, with salt and pepper hair and blue eyes as sharp as a hawk's, was Klaus Richter, the CEO of H&G. Beside him, his partners had serious faces, and I saw him frown with clear dissatisfaction as he checked his watch. A bad feeling, or rather, the scent of an impending disaster, hit me full force, and strangely, instead of worrying about my husband, the warm blood inside me began to boil. An excitement similar to what I felt the first day I stepped into an interpretation booth. From my position, I was like a spectator in the cheapest seat of a grand theater, but with the best panoramic view. The enormous hall was lavishly decorated with imported fresh flowers and cascading crystal chandeliers. But behind all that glitter, an undercurrent of tension was rising. I ordered a glass of water. The waiter gave me a pitying look, probably thinking I really was a lost country bumpkin. I didn't care. All my senses were focused on the main table in the center, where a crucial negotiation was about to unfold under the guise of an informal dinner. Julian was trying to play his role as host. He talked non-stop, gesturing excessively. He spoke in English, and the young interpreter, a boy with thick glasses and a brow beaded with sweat, struggled to translate into German. I narrowed my eyes. Even in the first few pleasantries, I spotted the problem. Julian said, "We are very honored to have you. We hope this collaboration will be the beginning of exponential growth for both parties." The interpreter translated haltingly, "We are very happy to see you. We hope the cooperation is good." A poor translation, lacking the formality and nuances of respect necessary when speaking with a partner of H&G's caliber. Mr. Richter frowned slightly but nodded politely. He replied with a long sentence, his voice deep and rapid, with the distinct accent of Hanover, considered the cradle of the purest German. "We appreciate your hospitality, but let's get straight to the point. Time is of the essence, and we still have some doubts regarding the patent issue." The interpreter's face drained of color. He turned to Julian and stammered. "He says thanks for the hospitality. He wants to talk business. He says there's a problem with the patent." Julian looked impatient. He clapped the interpreter on the shoulder. "Translate word for word. Ask him what the problem is exactly. I thought we had agreed on everything." The conversation became disjointed and clumsy. Chloe, at his side, tried to interject with a few English phrases, but Mr. Richter waved his hand to signal it wasn't necessary. He wanted to negotiate in his native tongue to ensure the absolute precision of the legal terms. The atmosphere grew tense. The laughter and conversations around them seemed to diminish, and all eyes began to focus on the main table. People started to whisper. Julian's predicament and the young interpreter's helplessness were turning an elegant scene into a cheap comedy. I saw Richter turn to whisper something to his assistant in French. I strained my ears. Despite the distance, thanks to the room's surround sound system, I managed to catch fragments. Unbelievable. They haven't prepared at all. This is a lack of respect. He was underestimating Julian's company, and worse, he was underestimating the capability of American professionals. The blood rushed to my face, not out of sympathy for Julian, but because my professional pride, the pride of someone who had been at the top, was being insulted. Then, the disaster materialized. They began to discuss the contract details. Julian, with the arrogance of someone used to shady deals, talked non-stop about sharing the usage rights. Tell him we'll share all this technology with our local partners to optimize profits. The interpreter, completely lost, translated the verb share as transfer, which implies ceding ownership. We will transfer all the technology to our local partners. The moment he finished the sentence, Mr. Richter's face turned red with fury. He slammed the table hard, causing a wine glass to spill onto the immaculate tablecloth. What transfer? That is a breach of contract. We discussed licensing the use, not transferring ownership. This is theft. The entire room fell into a deathly silence. The music stopped. Julian turned pale, his hands trembling. Even though he didn't understand what was said, the fury was universally understood. He spun around and yelled at the interpreter. What did he say? What did you translate? The young interpreter, on the verge of tears, stammered. I translated what you told me. He says it's theft and a breach of contract. Breach of what? I do clean business, Julian roared, sweating profusely. He looked around for help but found only looks of pity or concealed malice. Chloe was frozen, pale as a ghost, clutching her chair. Mr. Richter jumped to his feet, signaling his entourage to gather their documents. We are leaving. There is nothing more to discuss here. Julian, in a panic, lunged to stop Richter, but his bodyguards blocked him. The situation was critical. $1 billion contract was about to vanish, and the prestige of Julian and his company was about to be buried right there in the Apex Club. In my corner, I set my glass of water on the table. A soft click, but in my mind, it echoed like a judge's gavel. I stood up, adjusted the collar of my rustic knit dress, smoothed my hair, and began to walk. Not with the stooped, submissive posture of the housewife Eleanor of the past 10 years. It was the posture of Eleanor, the walking encyclopedia back straight, head high, gaze firm. Each of my steps echoed rhythmically and decisively on the marble floor. I cut through the whispering crowd. People parted to let me pass, looking at me with astonishment. It's Julian's wife. What is she going to do? Is she going to beg or make a jealous scene? I ignored them all. I walked directly toward Mr. Richter, placing myself in his path. Julian saw me, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and panic. Eleanor, what are you doing? Get back to your seat right now. Don't come here and cause more trouble. Get out. Chloe, regaining her composure, shrieked. Eleanor, are you crazy? Do you know where you are to come and make a fool of yourself? I didn't look at them. I only stared into the sharp blue eyes of Mr. Richter, which were burning with fury. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air from the climate control fill my lungs, awakening every dormant cell in my brain. And then I spoke, not in Spanish, not in my so-called high school English. I spoke in German, a perfect Hanoverian German, deep, clear, and full of authority. Mein Herr Richter, bitte beruhigen Sie sich für einen Moment. Es hat ein bedauerliches Missverständnis bei der Übersetzung gegeben. Dear Mr. Richter, I beg you to calm yourself for a moment. There has been an unfortunate misunderstanding in the translation. My sentence was like a bucket of cold water on a forest fire. Mr. Richter stopped in his tracks. The entire room held its breath. Julian and Chloe's jaws dropped, their eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. My moment had arrived. In that instant, I was no longer the submissive housewife from Greenwich. There I stood, back straight, facing the cutting gaze of the most powerful man at H&G. Around me, time seemed to stand still. The buzz of the party faded away, leaving only my intense focus and that of my interlocutor. Mr. Richter halted his departure, his thick white eyebrows knitted together. He observed me with a mix of scrutiny and surprise. He did not expect, in this distant country, at such a chaotic and unprofessional party, to find someone who spoke the pure German of Hanover, his homeland. It was that refined, unadulterated German, the language of nobility and academia, of which he had always been proud. He turned slowly to face me, His voice, still tinged with coldness, was slightly less harsh. "You speak German, and with such a pure accent. Who are you?" I offered a smile, a perfect protocol smile I had practiced thousands of times in front of a mirror 10 years ago. I gave a slight bow, a curtsy that followed European diplomatic protocol, not so low as to seem servile, but deep enough to show respect. "I am the wife of Mr. Julian Thorne. But at this moment, I am here as someone who understands the true value of this contract and does not wish for a linguistic error to ruin a great opportunity." Without waiting for him to ask more, I went straight to the point, gesturing to the folder of documents lying abandoned on the table. The interpreter used the word übertragen, which means to transfer ownership. However, I know that in the original draft, Clause 4, Section 2, the term is teilen, which means to share or to license. My husband meant to say that we will utilize the technology internally within our subsidiaries to optimize production, strictly adhering to your licensing regulations. We never had any intention of stealing your intellectual property. Richter was silent. He stared at me, his expression shifting from suspicion to astonishment, finally settling on a discreet admiration. He turned to his assistant, who nodded vigorously, confirming that what I had just said was legally precise. Behind me, Julian and Chloe seemed to wake from their initial shock. Julian lunged toward me, pale as wax, sweat running down his face and smudging the light makeup he wore. He didn't understand what I had said, but he saw that Richter had stopped, that the tension was easing, and he assumed I was begging or making a fool of myself. He grabbed my arm, squeezing so tightly I felt a sharp pain. "What the hell are you telling him? Do you want to humiliate me even more? Get back to your seat. Don't go showing off what you don't know." Chloe chimed in, her sharp, strident voice breaking the solemnity I had just created. "Eleanor, don't be crazy. What do you know about business contracts? If you say something stupid, they could sue us and ruin us. Julian, get her out of here. I'll handle the rest." I didn't turn to look at them. I only felt disgust at how they tried to drag me through the mud, even as I was saving their company's hide. I shook off Julian's grip with a sharp, decisive movement that sent him stumbling backward. I looked directly into Richter's eyes and continued in German, my voice serene as if the two yelling behind me didn't exist. "Please excuse the interruption. As you can see, the situation is a bit tense, but I assure you, the integrity of this contract is guaranteed." Richter managed a half smile. It was the smile of an old fox who had understood everything. He ignored Julian, walked back to the table, pulled out a chair, and gestured for me to sit opposite him. "Please, have a seat, madam. I'm listening." Richter's gesture was like a slap across Julian's face. He stood there, petrified, his mouth agape. His most important partner, the one who had been on the verge of leaving, was now respectfully inviting his wife, whom he considered useless, to sit at the negotiating table. I sat down with a calm and dignified posture. It had been 10 years since I felt this way. The feeling of being where I belonged, the feeling of being guided by my intellect. I glanced at the thick contract on the table. The words, the complex legal clauses, appeared before my eyes as familiar as old friends. The game had just begun, and this time I was dealing the cards. Julian couldn't accept it. The false vanity of a chauvinistic man was being severely threatened. He couldn't stand being sidelined at his own party, much less having his freeloader wife be the savior of the situation. He approached abruptly, intending to place his hand on my shoulder to force me to stand. He was going to use his authority as a husband to subdue me right there. "Eleanor, I forbid you. Get up right now. This is no place for women to meddle in business. Go home now." His voice was a hiss, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The crowd began to whisper more loudly. Chloe, by his side, added fuel to the fire. "Eleanor, don't make Julian angrier. Just leave. This is out of your league." I took a deep breath. My patience had run out. 10 years of submission was more than enough. Today, here, I would end this farce of a happy family. I turned sharply, my fiery gaze fixed on Julian's face. "Shut your mouth." 3 short words, sharp as a knife on marble. My voice echoed, clear and firm, in English, leaving Julian and Chloe stunned. Julian seemed to freeze. His half-raised hand stopped midair. Never in 10 years had he heard me raise my voice to him, much less yell at him in public. If you want to lose this contract, if you want your company to be bankrupt tomorrow, drowning in debt, and being the laughingstock of the business world, then keep talking. But if you want to hold on to what little pride you have left, shut your mouth and step aside. Don't make me repeat myself. The authority emanating from me made Julian recoil. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. The docile, caged canary had suddenly transformed into a phoenix, and its heat terrified him. He stammered, trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I gave him no chance to react. I turned back to Richter, instantly switching to German with a 180-degree turn in my demeanor that became professional and astonishingly calm. Let's discuss the technical details, Mr. Richter. I've heard your concerns about the production capacity of the Charleston factory. I began to analyze. I spoke of the production line, output capacity, the ISO standards Julian's factory applied or claimed to apply. This was knowledge Julian hadn't taught me. I had acquired it by secretly reading the documents he left scattered around his home office. Added to that was my prior understanding of industrial processes from my time as an interpreter for development projects. I highlighted the strengths Julian didn't know how to present and skillfully downplayed the weaknesses with promises of an improvement plan. I used technical terminology with absolute precision: throughput, yield, quality control. Richter nodded continuously. He took out a pen and began to take notes in his agenda. Interesting, very interesting. Your husband never explained it to me with such clarity. Julian, beside me, looked like a statue with a dumbfounded expression. He didn't understand what I was saying, but he could see Richter's attitude changing. He knew I was achieving what his entire team had failed to do. Chloe, for her part, had an ashen face. She slowly backed away, trying to go unnoticed. I was in control of the game. I was like an orchestra conductor, guiding the emotions and thoughts of my interlocutor at will. Every word I spoke carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. This feeling of power was wonderful. It compensated for 10 years lived as a parasite. 10 years of contempt. I glanced at Julian. He was trembling, not from cold, but from fear. He feared the truth unfolding before his eyes. His wife, whom he had always dismissed as ignorant, was in fact infinitely more competent than him, and my shadow was growing, swallowing his small, pathetic ego. The atmosphere at the negotiating table had warmed up thanks to my intervention. However, not everyone in Richter's entourage was so easily convinced. To Richter's right sat Mr. Dubois, the lead logistics advisor, a middle-aged Frenchman with small eyes and a mocking smile. From the beginning, he had maintained a skeptical attitude. He believed I was simply a lucky wife who had picked up some German somewhere, thrown in as a last resort to save face. He didn't believe a woman, the wife of a director as mediocre as Julian, could deeply understand the international transport system. Just as Richter finished praising me, Dubois interjected sharply. He used neither German nor English. He used French, speaking at the speed of a machine gun. Madame, that all sounds very well, but what about the congestion problem at the Port of New York and New Jersey? Your infrastructure is a nightmare. How can you guarantee our goods won't be stuck there for weeks? Without a logistics solution, this contract is worthless. He deliberately used maritime transport jargon, speaking quickly and slurring his words, intending to test me. He wanted to see me struggle. He wanted to see me forced to ask Julian, who he was sure wouldn't understand either. He wanted to unmask what he considered my charade. Julian, beside me, looked bewildered. He didn't understand a word. He looked at me anxiously, sweat breaking out on his forehead again. He feared I had run out of tricks. But Dubois was mistaken. He had picked the wrong opponent. He didn't know that French was my second most fluent language after German. I had lived in Paris for 2 years. I had worked with the largest shipping companies in Marseille. I turned to Dubois, looking directly into his small eyes with a smile even more arrogant than his. I replied immediately in fluent French, with a perfect Parisian accent down to the last detail. Monsieur Dubois, your concern about New York is entirely legitimate. It's a notorious problem, which is precisely why we won't be going through New York. Dubois froze. He didn't expect such a quick reaction. I continued my attack without giving him time to recover. We will use the port complex of Savannah for the large mother ships. As for inland transport, we already have a preliminary agreement to use direct rail routes, thus avoiding the highway congestion around the major hubs. Furthermore, we will apply the Green Channel Customs procedure for priority goods, reducing clearance time from 48 to 6 hours. Does that answer your question, monsieur? I spoke fluently, laying out each solution with clarity and precision. I didn't just translate. I presented a strategy I had secretly researched after seeing Julian's company constantly fined for delivery delays. I had tried to give him my opinion, but every time I opened my mouth about work, he would cut me off. Women don't know about these things. Now, the knowledge he had scorned was his only salvation. Dubois' face went from arrogance to the deepest astonishment. His mouth hung open, and his pen fell from his hand. He turned to Richter, stammering, "Boss, this lady knows the routes better than I do." Richter let out a laugh, a hearty laugh that echoed through the room. He applauded, a loud applause dedicated only to me. Bravo, magnificent. Those around us, though they didn't understand the content of the conversation, seeing the reaction of the German delegation, began to applaud as well. The applause spread, crackling like a downpour. There I sat, in the midst of the applause and admiration, with a strange calm. I looked at Julian. He stood there, smaller and more pathetic than ever. He looked at me as if I were a monster. In his eyes, there was no gratitude, only fear. He knew that from that moment on, the golden cage in Greenwich could no longer hold me. The entire room seemed to have become my personal stage. Admiration spread from the main table throughout the vast space of the Apex Club. The guests who had previously looked at me with pity now whispered, casting glances of curiosity and respect. Julian remained there, rooted to the spot like a cracked statue. He dared neither to sit nor to leave. He could only watch helplessly as the wife he had scorned shone with her own light, completely eclipsing his diminutive shadow. But the challenge was not over. H&G was a multinational, and those accompanying Richter were old wolves from all over the world. After subduing the Frenchman Dubois, a burly man with a thick beard sitting opposite, Richter spoke up. It was Petrov, the Russian representative in charge of the energy and raw materials market. Petrov did not mince words. He set his glass of vodka down on the table with a sharp thud, looked at me with eyes that seemed like glowing embers, and spoke in a deep Russian voice, a strong and powerful language. "Mrs. Eleanor, you speak very well of logistics, but I am interested in money. The world price of oil is very volatile. How can you guarantee that the cost of fuel for transport won't eat into our profits? If the price of crude goes up 20% next month, who will absorb that difference? We will not accept that risk." Petrov's question went straight for the financial jugular. It was a problem that stumped many American companies in international negotiations, often leading to massive losses for lack of price hedging tools. Julian, hearing Petrov's brusque tone, turned pale. He turned to me, tried to say something, but held back. He remembered my sharp gaze from before and swallowed his words. I smiled with confidence and calm. I turned to Petrov and answered him in fluent Russian with a perfect Moscow accent, energetic yet sharp. "Mr. Petrov, your concern is entirely justified, but we are not amateurs playing the market. We have already signed hedging contracts to lock in the price of fuel with international financial institutions for the entire next quarter. Even if the price of oil rises by 30%, your transport cost will remain fixed according to the price agreed upon in this contract today. Your risk is zero." Petrov was stunned for a second, then burst into a thunderous laugh. He gave a thumbs up and nodded repeatedly. "Very good. A woman who understands financial derivatives. I like the way you do business." Without giving time for the tension to dissipate, Mr. Tanaka, the Japanese strategic market advisor who had remained silent and observant, adjusted his glasses. He was known for being meticulous and reserved. Tanaka didn't ask about technology or money. He asked about culture and people, the key factor for entering the Asian market. He spoke in Japanese, his voice soft but firm. "Eleanor-san, H&G wants to expand in Southeast Asia, but we fear that cultural differences will be an obstacle. What strategy do you propose for a German industrial product to integrate into the local market without losing its identity? It was a question of business philosophy. An inadequate answer could sound empty. I turned to Tanaka, bowing my head in the Japanese manner with respect. Tanaka-san, as the American proverb says, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. We will not rigidly sell a German product. We will sell a locally adapted German solution. We will create a team of local engineers trained with German discipline, but with a deep understanding of local consumer habits. It will be a fusion of the samurai spirit and German tank-like precision. Harmony, not imposition. Upon hearing this, Tanaka's eyes sparkled behind his glasses. He clasped his hands and returned the bow, an uncommon gesture for proud Japanese businessmen towards foreign women. Wonderful. Your vision is very profound. Finally, the representative from Italy, Mr. Romano, an elegant man with wavy hair, raised his wine glass. He no longer tested me. He looked at me with pure admiration. Signora Eleanor, I have never seen anyone switch between languages and cultural mindsets with such fluency. You are like an orchestra conductor leading a symphony of words. It is an honor for us. I raised my glass of water and replied in Italian as smooth as velvet. Grazie per I complimenti, signore. Le lingue sono ponti, e io sono solo una devota costruttrice di ponti. Thank you for the compliment, sir. Languages are bridges, and I am merely a devoted builder of bridges. The table erupted in applause. Richter, Dubois, Petrov, Tanaka, Romano, 5 powerful men representing 5 major economies, looked at me as an equal, even as a star. I glanced at Julian. He was lost in the applause, alone and out of place. He looked at me, but his eyes no longer held the usual contempt, but a deep bewilderment. He realized that the cage he had so carefully built over 10 years, I had shattered with a few sentences. The dinner came to an end, but the outcome was completely different from the script Julian had imagined. Richter stood up and fastened the button of his jacket. He signaled to his assistant to bring the official contract. It was the moment that would decide the survival of Julian's company, the moment he had waited for all year. The assistant placed the leather folder on the table and opened it to the last page, where the signature lines awaited. A Mont Blanc fountain pen, black and shiny, rested beside it. Richter picked up the pen but didn't sign immediately. He turned to look at me with deep respect. Mrs. Eleanor, I must confess something. Before this dinner, my intention was to cancel the collaboration. I didn't trust your husband's management capabilities, and the initial lack of professionalism reinforced that decision. Richter's direct words startled Julian. Beside me. He clasped his hands, his palms soaked with sweat. Chloe, huddled behind him, dared not look up. Richter continued, his voice echoing in the room. But you have changed everything. Your knowledge, your intelligence, and your character have convinced me I am signing this contract not for Mr. Thorne's company, but because I trust you. I believe that with your involvement, this project will be a success. With that, he signed the contract with a decisive stroke. The sound of the pen on the paper was clearly heard in the silence. Then he slid the folder toward Julian. Your turn, Mr. CEO. Julian approached. It should have been the most glorious moment of his life. He would have been photographed shaking hands with a German magnate. The press would have praised him. But at that moment, he looked pathetic. He picked up the pen with a trembling hand. He knew his signature was a mere formality, that his value in his partner's eyes was now zero. They were signing because of his wife, the woman he considered useless. He signed with a clumsy, shaky script, far from his usual arrogant and confident strokes. As soon as he put down the pen, the flashes from the photographers Julian had hired began to go off, but ironically, the lenses were not aimed at him. They were aimed at me and Richter as we shook hands. The next day's cover photo would be of a woman in a simple beige knit dress, standing proudly next to a German industrial tycoon, with Julian as a blurry shadow to the side. Chloe, seeing that everything was decided, tried to salvage some of her image. She sidled up to Richter with a manufactured smile and extended her hand. Mr. Richter, I'm Julian's personal assistant. It will be a pleasure to assist you in the future." Richter didn't even look at her. He turned and took a black, gold-edged business card from his pocket. He presented it to me with both hands. "Mrs. Eleanor, this is my personal card. H&G is looking for a strategic advisor for the Asia-Pacific region. I can think of no one more suitable than you. I hope you will consider my offer. The compensation will be commensurate with your talent. I assure you, it is a figure your husband wouldn't dare dream of in his entire life." I took the card. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of its material, but because of the weight of opportunity, of freedom. "Thank you, sir. I will consider it seriously," I replied. Julian was petrified. He heard every word: strategic advisor, Asia-Pacific region, a salary beyond his wildest dreams. Those words were like sledgehammers against his ego. He realized that he had not only lost control over his wife, but he was at risk of losing everything to the woman he had scorned. The signing ceremony ended. The guests moved to the cocktail area for dancing and socializing. The soft music started playing again, but for me, it was the prelude to another battle, a much crueler one, the battle within my own family. Julian didn't wait for the guests to leave. He grabbed my wrist roughly and dragged me out of the main hall into a deserted corridor leading to the parking garage. I saw Chloe running after us, the clatter of her heels echoing on the floor, her face contorted. In a secluded corner, Julian threw me off violently. My back hit the cold wall. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol and rage. The fury he had contained for hours finally erupted. "Very clever. What is this little show you're putting on? What are you trying to prove? That you're smarter than me? That I'm an idiot who needs his wife to save his ass to sign a contract?" he shouted, spitting saliva. He felt no gratitude. In his chauvinistic, selfish mind, my action hadn't been to save the company, but to humiliate him. He would have rather lost the contract than have his wife outshine him. I leaned against the wall, fixing the sleeve he had dislodged. I looked at him with an icy calm. For the first time in 10 years, I looked at him without fear, only with pity. "It's not a show. I did what was necessary to save your company from bankruptcy. If I hadn't spoken, do you think you'd still be here yelling at me? Shut up!" Julian raised his hand to slap me, but I didn't flinch. I lifted my chin and looked him straight in the eye. My cold, determined gaze stopped his hand in midair. He didn't dare to strike. He was afraid. He was afraid of the woman standing before him. "Go ahead," I challenged, my voice low and firm. "After that slap, you will lose everything. Richter holds me in high regard. What do you think he'll do with the newly signed contract if I show up tomorrow with a bruise on my face?" Julian lowered his hand, trembling, grinding his teeth. "Why? Why did you hide this from me for 10 years? Did you pretend to be dumb, submissive? For what? To wait for today and stab me in the back?" "I didn't hide it," I smiled bitterly. "You just never asked. You never cared who I was, what I studied, what I could do. You just needed a doll who could cook and have children. You locked me in the house, brainwashed me into believing I was useless. You were afraid I was better than you, that my shadow would eclipse yours. Your confidence was built on my insecurity. That's why you forbade me from socializing. You forbade me from working." Every word was a needle pricking his guilty conscience. He stumbled back, his face a mask of horror. He never expected I had unraveled his dark psychology so long ago. Chloe, seeing Julian at a disadvantage, tried to defend him. "Eleanor, you're being too harsh. Julian cares about you. He wanted you to live comfortably. That's why he let you stay home. You should be grateful instead of having this attitude." "You shut up too!" I cut her off, not even deigning to look at her. "This is between my husband and me. It's none of the business of a secretary who is also his mistress." Chloe was speechless, her face flushing as her secret was revealed. She looked to Julian for help, but he was too busy confronting his own fears. I opened my purse and took out a white envelope I had prepared at home. I threw it at Julian. The envelope fell to the floor between the three of us. "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse. "The divorce papers. I've already signed them." The world seemed to explode. Julian looked from the envelope to me. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His submissive wife of 10 years dared to ask him for a divorce. "Are you crazy? Who do you think you are to leave me? If you walk out of my house, what will you live on? Are you going to eat rocks? Who am I? You just saw it at the party? I managed a half smile. And I didn't come here tonight to save you. I came to reclaim what is mine. This stage is mine, and from now on, you are my past. With that, I turned and walked away. I left the hotel directly and hailed a cab. I didn't look back. Behind me, Julian's shouts and Chloe's sobs faded into the bright New York night. In the cab, I rolled down the window, letting the night wind hit my face. It was cold but incredibly refreshing. I filled my lungs with the air of freedom. 10 years of captivity were over. The phoenix had truly risen from the ashes. I returned to the house in Greenwich after 2 a.m. The large house was steeped in silent darkness, but that silence no longer scared me. For me, it was now just a temporary stop before starting a new chapter. I didn't turn on the main light. Only the dim glow from a night lamp guided me. I went straight to the bedroom, the cell that had imprisoned my youth for a decade. I pulled a large suitcase from the top of the closet. The sound of its wheels on the wooden floor was the sound of farewell. I began to pack my things. There wasn't much. 10 years as a rich man's wife, yet my personal belongings amounted to a few sets of old clothes Julian allowed me to wear, the books in other languages I bought secretly and kept under the bed, and most importantly, the wooden box with my diplomas and certificates, the only proof that I once lived a brilliant life. I left everything Julian had bought me, the expensive jewelry he forced me to wear for appearances, the designer bags I never chose. I arranged them neatly on the vanity, as if returning the props from a role I had grown tired of playing. The next morning, just as the first rays of sun peeked through the window, the familiar roar of a car's engine sounded in the driveway. Julian was back. I heard his hurried footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door burst open. Julian appeared, looking more pitiful than ever. His jacket was wrinkled, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie crooked, and his eyes red from insomnia and alcohol. Seeing me zipping up the suitcase, he lunged forward and grabbed my hand, his voice broken with panic. "Eleanor, what are you doing? Where are you going?" I pulled my hand away and continued my task coolly. "Where I'm going is none of your business. The divorce papers are on the table. Sign them, and I'll see you in court." Julian stared at me, dumbfounded. He saw no submission or fear in my eyes, only a wall of ice. He knew this time it wasn't a threat. He knelt and hugged my legs, the cowardly act of a loser trying to cling to his last vestige of power. "Eleanor, I was wrong. I was drunk yesterday. I spoke without thinking. Forgive me. We've been married for 10 years. How can you leave me over something so silly?" "Something silly?" I laughed bitterly. "You call 10 years of contempt, confinement, and betrayal something silly?" Julian looked up, his face contorted in an attempt to look pitiful. "I know I was wrong, but everything I do is for this family. I work so hard, I'm under so much pressure. That's why sometimes I come home irritable. You have to understand me. Look, in all of New York, no one lives as well as you do. A luxury house, everything done for you, no worries about money. If you leave me, how will you survive?" He still used that condescending, paternalistic tone. He still thought I was a parasite incapable of living without him as a host. "Don't worry about me." I leaned down to look at him, my gaze sharp. Richter offered me a position as a strategic advisor. My starting salary is more than enough to buy 10 houses like this one. I don't need your money. I need respect, something you never had. Hearing Richter's name, Julian seemed to get an electric shock. He let go of my legs and recoiled, pale as a ghost. He realized I was no longer the caged bird. I had flown high, very high, to a height he could never reach, even if he broke his neck trying. He changed tactics. From pleading, he moved to bribery. "Eleanor, if you're so good, why don't you stay and help me? The company is in trouble. The contract with H&G needs follow-up. If you stay, I'll make you vice president. I'll give you stock. I'll fire Chloe right now. I'll do whatever you want." I looked at him, feeling a wave of nausea. He was willing to sell out his mistress, to sell his pride, just to keep me, his money-making machine. "It's too late, Julian," I said, dragging the suitcase toward the door. When I needed your protection the most, you joined others to humiliate me. When I shone the brightest, you felt envy and tried to drag me down. You don't love me. You only love yourself. And your company? I'll take very good care of it, but as a representative of H&G, not as your wife. I walked out of the room, leaving Julian sitting on the floor, shrunken and pathetic like a dirty rag. As I went downstairs to the living room, I found Chloe lurking near the door. She must have followed Julian here to find out what was happening. Seeing me with the suitcase, a flash of triumph shone in her eyes, but her mouth feigned kindness. "Oh, Eleanor, where are you going? Julian is so upset. Aren't you going to stay and comfort him?" I stopped and looked her straight in the face. This woman, so young and already with such a twisted heart. For 3 years, she had not only been Julian's mistress, but also his eyes and ears to spy on me. "You're just in time," I said calmly. "Come in. I have something to show you before I go." Chloe, perplexed but curious, followed me into the living room. I opened my purse, took out a thin file, and tossed it onto the coffee table. "Take a look." Chloe picked it up and began to leaf through the pages. Her face changed color, from rosy to white, then to an ashen gray. They were detailed printouts of her expenses, the messages she sent Julian reporting on me, and even photos of her with another man, a competitor of Julian's company. "Where did you get this?" Chloe stammered, her hands trembling as she dropped the file. "Do you think because I'm a housewife, I'm blind and deaf?" I laughed coldly. "Did you think I didn't know about the times you took pictures of me at the market to report to Julian how much the parsley cost? Did you think I didn't find the camera you secretly installed in the living room to watch me?" I moved closer to her, lowering my voice to a whisper that chilled her to the bone. "I know everything. I know you're an infiltrator from a competitor sent to sabotage Julian. I know you're siphoning money from him to support that lover of yours." I kept quiet, waiting for the right moment. And that moment is today. Just then, Julian came down the stairs. He heard my last words and looked at Chloe, stunned. "What is Eleanor saying?" "Chloe, are you a spy?" Panicked, Chloe threw herself at Julian's feet. "Julian, don't believe her. She's making it all up to separate us. I love you, I really do." I took a DNA test result from the file and showed it to Julian. "Really? And whose baby are you expecting? According to this result, you're 8 weeks pregnant, but 8 weeks ago, you were on a business trip to Germany." Julian snatched the paper, his eyes bulging as he read the result. He let out a roar of pain, like a wounded beast, and slapped Chloe so hard the sound echoed through the room. "You slut! You cheated on me! I kept you like a queen, and you dare to betray me!" Chloe fell to the floor, covering her face as she cried and begged. Julian lunged at her, hitting her mercilessly. The chaotic, tragicomic scene unfolded in the luxurious living room. The two who had conspired to trample me were now tearing each other apart like rabid dogs. I watched them without the slightest satisfaction, only weariness. This was the cesspool I had been trapped in for 10 years. Luckily, I had managed to get out in time. "You two sort out your affairs," I said loudly, over Julian's insults. "I'm leaving. And Julian, take care of yourself for when we have to go to court. We'll calculate the marital assets and common debts fairly." I dragged my suitcase to the door. Behind me, the crying, pleading, and insults continued. The door of the house closed behind me, shutting in the noise, the lies, and the tragedy. I had barely left the gates of the community when a minivan screeched to a halt in front of me. The door opened, and a large woman with a face caked in makeup and a young woman in flashy clothes got out. It was my mother-in-law, Dolores, and my sister-in-law, Heather. Seeing me with the suitcase, Dolores planted her hands on her hips and started screaming in the middle of the street. "Oh, look at this tramp trying to escape. Julian told me you asked for a divorce and that you made a scene at his company party. Who do you think you are?" Heather, at her side, lifted her chin with a disdainful air. "Where are you going? If you leave with what you're wearing. What's in that suitcase? Did you steal money from my brother to run away? Open it. Let me check." The two of them lunged to grab my suitcase. I stepped back, clutching the handle, my gaze hardening. Before, I respected them because they were my elders, my husband's family, and I always put up with their impertinence and their requests for money. But I didn't have to anymore. "Get back," I shouted. "Don't touch my things!" Dolores froze for a moment, then became more aggressive. "You dare to shout at me? You shameless hussy! Get out of my son's house right now! Out! I'll tell Julian to divorce you and throw you on the street with nothing so you can starve to death." "That's right," Heather added. "This house was bought with my brother's blood, sweat, and tears. You're just a freeloader. You have no right to take even a pin." I let out a laugh that stunned them. I put the suitcase on the ground, opened the outer pocket, and took out a plastic folder containing an official document. I held it up high, letting the sun glint off it. "Look closely. What is this?" Dolores squinted. "The property deed." "So what? It's in my son's name." "You're mistaken, ma'am," I said, articulating each word. "Open your eyes and read the owner's name, Eleanor Hayes. And look at the date of acquisition, 2012, 2 years before I married your son." Dolores and Heather looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. They snatched the deed, their eyes devouring the owner's name. Sure enough, it was my name, and the date was correct. "Impossible," Dolores stammered. "Where did you get the money? You were just a low-level interpreter." "Low level?" I laughed with disdain. "Did you know that 10 years ago, 1 day of work in the booth earned me what a blue-collar worker made in a year? I bought this house with my savings and earnings from some stock investments. When I married Julian, he was drowning in debt from a failed business. I let him live here to save his reputation. I never put the house in his name, nor did I declare it as community property. Legally, it's my sole property." I snatched the deed back and put it carefully in my purse. "So, the one who has to get out of here isn't me, but your son and your entire family of moochers. I'm giving Julian 1 week to pack his things and disappear from my house. If not, I'll call a process server and the police to evict him." The blood drained from Dolores's face. She had to lean on Heather to keep from falling. Heather's mouth was wide open, speechless. They never imagined that the freeloader daughter-in-law they had so despised was actually a wealthy woman who held all the cards. I called over a security guard who was patrolling nearby. "Please escort these 2 ladies off my property. They are disturbing the peace and bothering the neighbors." The guard nodded and approached Dolores. "Please, ladies, you need to leave. Don't make us take further action." I dragged my suitcase to the exit and got into the waiting taxi. In the rearview mirror, I saw Dolores sitting on the ground, crying and wailing, while Heather frantically called Julian. The war over assets had ended before it began, because I always had the most powerful ace up my sleeve, my financial independence and autonomy. The taxi took me to a 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan. I didn't choose it for extravagance, but to remind myself of my true worth. I deserved to enjoy the best services, to live in the most distinguished space, something I had denied myself for 10 years. As soon as I got to the room, my phone buzzed, an unknown number from Germany. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, this is Eleanor." On the other end, Richter's deep, familiar voice. This time he spoke in English, likely for international professional courtesy. "Hello, Mrs. Eleanor. This is Klaus Richter. I apologize if I'm disturbing you at this hour." "Not at all, sir. I was expecting your call. Excellent. My secretary has just sent the draft of the employment contract to your email. We are very interested in you accepting the position of Senior Strategic Advisor for Southeast Asia. Your first task will be to review the entire collaboration process with our partners in the United States, starting with Mr. Thorne's company." I smiled. Richter was an old fox. He wasn't just hiring me for my talent. He wanted to use me as a sharp sword to excise the tumors from his network of partners. And he knew that no one knew the ins and outs of Julian's company better than I did. "I accept," I replied firmly, "but I have one condition. I want full decision-making power in the audit and management of infringements, regardless of who the partner is, including my husband's company." "That is exactly what I expected from you, Eleanor. I need absolute transparency. Welcome to H&G. I hung up and fell back onto the plush bed, a sense of relief washing over my body. It was done. My future was decided. A brilliant future, full of power. I got up and went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. The long hair tied back in a ponytail was boring. My face was pale and lifeless. I needed a change. That afternoon, I went to the most famous salon in the city. I asked them to cut my long hair into a shoulder-length bob, dyed an elegant hazelnut brown. In the mirror, I saw a completely different woman, sophisticated, modern, and full of energy. Afterward, I visited the luxury boutiques. I didn't choose fussy dresses, but impeccably tailored pantsuits and blouses of soft but structured silk that conveyed professionalism and authority. I bought a pair of pointed toe heels, the weapon that would help me stand tall in the business world. When I returned to the hotel, I was no longer the housewife Eleanor of yesterday. I was Eleanor Hayes, the strategic advisor for H&G. I was ready for tomorrow's battle, a battle without weapons, but one that would redefine the entire game. On Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office building where Julian's company was located was gloomier than usual. Rumors about the scandal at the holiday dinner had spread throughout the New York business world. Employees arrived with worried faces, whispering about the company's uncertain future. At 9 a.m. sharp, a luxury car from H&G pulled up to the entrance. The chauffeur opened the door for me, and I stepped out. I was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that enhanced my figure and skin tone, my short hair impeccable. In my hand, a leather briefcase with documents. Behind me were 2 German assistants and a lawyer representing H&G Corporation. We went straight into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, the receptionist saw me, and her jaw dropped. She stammered, trying to greet me as she always did. "Hello, Elle," but my commanding presence stopped her. "Inform CEO Julian Thorne that the delegation from H&G has arrived to discuss the contract execution procedures," I said coldly. Yes, ma'am." The receptionist nervously picked up the phone. Without waiting for her to finish, I signaled to my team to proceed directly to the main boardroom. I knew that at this hour, Julian was in his weekly meeting with the department heads. I pushed open the door to the room. The murmuring inside ceased abruptly. All eyes were fixed on the entrance. Julian was standing at the head of the table with a marker in his hand, pointing at a whiteboard. He looked gaunt and exhausted. Chloe was sitting in a corner, her face swollen, trying to hide a bruise on her cheek with a thick layer of makeup. When they saw me, they both flinched as if they had seen a ghost. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" Julian asked, his voice hoarse but trying to maintain a tone of authority. "This is an internal meeting. If you have no business here, get out." I didn't answer him. I walked to the empty chair opposite him, the seat reserved for the strategic partner. I placed my briefcase on the table calmly. I sat down, crossed my legs, and leaned back comfortably. "I'm not here as your wife, Mr. CEO." I emphasized the last 2 words with irony. "I am Eleanor Hayes, Senior Strategic Advisor and Plenipotentiary Representative of H&G for Southeast Asia." I signaled to my assistant to place my business card and the power of attorney signed by Richter on the table, sliding them toward Julian. Julian picked up the paper with a trembling hand. He read it over and over as if he couldn't believe his eyes. The department heads around him began to whisper. They looked at me with a mix of astonishment and admiration. They had heard rumors that I had saved the company, but they didn't expect me to return with such power. "Impossible," Julian muttered. "How could he have appointed you so quickly? What kind of witchcraft did you use on him?" "Competence, Julian," I replied curtly. "Something you never wanted to acknowledge in me. And now, as the representative of the contracting party, I demand that this meeting focus on auditing and reviewing the financial capacity of the partner company." "Audit?" Chloe exclaimed, her voice breaking. "We just closed the annual audit. Everything is transparent. Whether it's transparent or not, we'll soon see." I stared hard at Chloe with a sharp gaze. "I've hired one of the Big Four for an independent audit. They are already waiting in the accounting department. I hope you have all the receipts prepared, especially for the representation and travel expenses you are in charge of." Chloe turned pale, and her pen dropped. She knew exactly what I was referring to. The amounts she had diverted for her personal expenses, the fake invoices, everything was in my crosshairs. Julian slammed the table. "You're trying to corner me. Do you want to destroy this company?" "I'm not destroying it. I stood up, placing my hands on the table and leaning toward him. I'm saving it from the parasites that are corroding it. H&G doesn't work with fraudulent partners. If you're clean, you have nothing to fear. If you have something to hide, you'd better be prepared. The room fell silent. No one dared to breathe. The power had completely shifted. The woman who was once considered useless now held the fate of the entire company in her hands. The audit lasted for 3 tense days. Under my direction, the team of professional auditors scrutinized every corner of Julian's company's accounting. I didn't rely just on the numbers. I relied on my prodigious memory of the times Julian had revealed details in phone calls at home, of the times Chloe had brought documents for him to sign and I had glanced at them secretly. I knew exactly where they hid the slush funds. I knew which shell companies they used for tax evasion. On the 4th day, in the afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with the company's board of directors, including the non-family shareholders. Julian and Chloe were summoned to provide explanations. I threw a thick dossier in the middle of the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, we have the results of the audit. The situation is much worse than we imagined. I projected eloquent charts and figures on the screen. First, CEO Julian Thorne and the head of accounting, Chloe's accomplice, conspired to falsify more than 50 raw material purchase contracts with shell companies in the names of their relatives. The total amount diverted amounts to over $20 million in the last 3 years. A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. The shareholders turned to look at Julian with fury. He kept his head down, sweating profusely. Second, I continued in a voice of steel. Miss Chloe, as the CEO's assistant, overstepped her authority to approve numerous personal expenses as if they were company expenses, from luxury travel and designer shopping to supporting a lover, all recorded as corporate expenses. I projected invoices from 5-star hotels, receipts for Hermes bags, and photos of her vacations with the other man that I had compiled. Chloe shrieked, covering her face. "Turn that off! You're violating my privacy." "Privacy?" I laughed coldly. "When you use shareholder money for your games, you lose that right. This is embezzlement." I turned to the shareholders. As the representative of H&G, I declare that we will suspend all collaboration and cancel the contract if the current management is not removed and held legally accountable. We cannot allow our brand to be tarnished by fraudsters. Mr. Gaston, a major and highly respected shareholder, stood up and pointed at Julian. "Julian, I trusted you. And you dare to do this to us? Do you take us for fools?" I propose his immediate dismissal as CEO and that we sue him to recover the money. Yes, dismissal. To the courts. The other shareholders supported him. Julian crumbled. He slumped into his chair, his gaze lost. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no longer anger or hatred, but absolute despair. He knew he was finished. He would not only lose the company, the house, and his wife, but he was also facing prison. I gathered my documents, ready to leave. My work there was done. I had brought the truth to light. I had obtained justice for myself and for everyone he had deceived. As I walked past Julian, I stopped and said in a low voice, "You see, Julian? Without me as your support, you are nothing but a failure. You broke your own plate of food. Don't blame anyone but your own greed and stupidity." I walked out of the room, leaving behind a chaos of shouts and accusations. The long corridor opened up before me, but this time, at the end of the path, shone the light of freedom and glory. Julian's downfall was swifter than I imagined. Within 24 hours, the news of his company's financial scandal flooded the business press. CEO embezzles company funds. Billion-dollar contract in jeopardy. The hidden face of a successful entrepreneur. Sensational headlines that sealed his reputation. Sitting in my new office at the H&G headquarters, I savored a black coffee while reading the news. I felt an undeniable satisfaction, but more deeply, a great sense of relief. Justice had finally been served. My phone rang. It was Heather, Julian's sister. I answered, not out of a desire to hear her insults, but out of curiosity to know how desperate the family was. "Eleanor, are you happy now?" Heather's voice was broken with sobs. "The police have taken Julian. My mother collapsed and is in the ER. You are a horrible person. You've destroyed my family." "Heather," I replied calmly, "the one who signed false contracts was Julian. The ones who embezzled the money were Julian and Chloe. I only brought the truth to light. If your brother had done things right, no one could have hurt him. Instead of calling me to insult me, you should be looking for a good lawyer for him. But they've seized the house, and his bank accounts are frozen. Where are my mother and I supposed to live? Let us stay in the Greenwich house. After all, it's your house too." Her audacity made me laugh. The day before, they wanted to throw me out on the street, and now they were begging me for a roof over their heads. "I'm sorry, I've already put that house up for sale. I don't want to keep any memories of your miserable family. I'm giving you 24 hours to get out. After that, I'm changing the locks." I hung up and blocked her number. I no longer had any obligation to support those who had exploited me for 10 years. That afternoon, I went with my lawyer to the house to supervise the handover. The scene was desolate. Furniture was strewn everywhere. Dolores was sitting on the floor by the entrance, crying and cursing the heavens. Heather was packing clothes into boxes while arguing with several creditors who were surrounding the gate. Seeing me get out of a luxury car, Dolores lunged to attack me, but the bodyguard stopped her. "Give me back my son, you wretch! Ever since you came into this family, it's been nothing but bad luck." I looked at her coldly. "The bad luck is that your son is incompetent and greedy. You spoiled him, tolerated all his vices, and now you blame me. The only one who has harmed him is you." I signaled to my lawyer to proceed. Piece by piece, the family's belongings were brought out to the street. The sofa where Julian watched TV, the tea set Dolores used to show off to her friends, it all now lay in a pile like scrap. When the gate closed, I handed the keys to the real estate agent. "Sell it as soon as possible, at any price." I turned and walked away, leaving behind the house that was once my personal hell without the slightest hint of nostalgia. A month later, the trial was held. I was called as the primary witness. Julian in the defendant's box looked like a ghost. He had lost a lot of weight, his hair had turned gray. He wore a prison uniform, his eyes sunken and lifeless. When I entered the courtroom, a flash of belated regret shone in his eyes, but it was quickly smothered by humiliation. Chloe was there too, beside him. She no longer had her arrogant air, her face pale and makeup-free, her eyes swollen from crying. The trial began. The evidence I provided was so overwhelming that Julian's lawyer could barely defend him. Every act of embezzlement, tax evasion, and creation of slush funds was exposed. When it was my turn to testify, Julian's lawyer tried to attack me, suggesting I had acted out of personal revenge. "Mrs. Hayes, is it true that you were aware of these irregularities for some time but remained silent, waiting for the moment to get revenge on Mr. Thorne?" I looked him straight in the eye and answered with a clear voice. "I remained silent because I hoped my husband would come to his senses. I remained silent because I wanted to preserve my family. But when he and his mistress trampled on my honor, when they used embezzled money for their luxuries and planned to hide their assets, I had to speak up. It is not revenge. It is defending justice and the rights of honest shareholders." The courtroom murmured in approval. My firm words dismantled all the defense's arguments. At the end of the trial, Julian was sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to return all the money. Chloe received 7 years for complicity and embezzlement. All of Julian's assets were confiscated. As they led him out of the courtroom, he passed by me. He stopped for a moment and mumbled, "I'm sorry." I didn't look at him. I only replied in a low voice, "You don't owe me an apology. You owe it to yourself for not having lived a decent life." The police van drove away, taking the 2 people who had sown chaos in my life. I watched them go, feeling incredibly light. A dark chapter had closed forever. After the trial, I threw myself into work. As a strategic advisor, I traveled constantly between Germany, Singapore, and the U.S. Long flights and intense meetings kept me busy, helping me to heal. One rainy afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. "Eleanor, it's Heather. I know I have no right to contact you, but my mother is dying in the hospital. She wants to see you one last time." I almost deleted the message, but my conscience wouldn't let me. After all, she was my mother-in-law for 10 years. I asked the driver to take me to the hospital. Dolores was in the ICU, connected to countless tubes. The stroke she suffered after losing the house and seeing her son in prison had devastated her. Heather, at her side, thin and hollow-eyed, was feeding her a watery soup. Seeing me, she stood up, her head bowed. "Eleanor, thank you for coming." I placed a fruit basket on the table and approached. Dolores opened her tired, glassy eyes. Seeing me, she tried to move her lips, and tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. "Eleanor, I was wrong." Her voice was a faint whisper. "Forgive, Julian. Forgive me." She tried to reach for my hand but lacked the strength. I looked at the woman who was once arrogant and cruel, now bedridden and helpless. I felt a pang of compassion. "Rest. Don't speak," I said softly. I didn't answer her request. I just gave a slight nod. Forgiveness. Perhaps I had already done it. Holding a grudge would only hurt me. I was letting them go, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be at peace. I turned to Heather and took an envelope from my purse. "Here. This is to help with the hospital expenses. Take care of her. I won't be back." Heather took the envelope and burst into tears. "Thank you, Eleanor. I'm so sorry. We were horrible to you." I left the room. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor faded behind me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The puddles reflected the streetlights. I took a deep breath of the damp air, feeling my soul cleansed. My divorce was processed quickly. With Julian in prison, there were no disputes over assets, as his had been confiscated and mine were my sole property. The day I received the decree, I went alone. The judge handed me the document with the official seal. "Congratulations, ma'am. You are legally a free woman." I held the paper, looking at it. It was just a piece of paper, but it ended 10 years of my youth, 10 years of tears, and it was my passport to a new life. As I left the courthouse, the bright New York sun blinded me. I looked up at the blue sky, feeling an absolute sense of freedom. No one would ever tell me what to wear, what to say. No one would ever call me useless again. I took out my phone and called Richter. "Sir, my personal matters are resolved. I'm ready to take up my new position at the Berlin headquarters next month." "Fantastic, Eleanor. We're waiting for you. There's a seat on the global board of directors reserved for you." I smiled and put the phone away. Berlin, Heidelberg, the cobblestone streets, the old oak trees, the university classrooms where I once dreamed. I was about to go back to where it all began. But first, I had one last thing to do. I went to visit Julian in prison. Sitting across from me, separated by a glass partition, he looked like he had aged 10 years. He didn't dare to look me in the eye. "I'm moving to Germany," I told him. He nodded slightly. "Congratulations. You deserve it." I came to say goodbye and to thank you. He looked at me, surprised. "Thank me? For what? For ruining your life?" "No. Thank you for showing me the depths of suffering so that I could appreciate my own worth. Without your oppression, perhaps I wouldn't have had the strength to rise like this. It was the most expensive lesson of my life." I stood up and placed my hand on the glass. "Goodbye, Julian. I hope you reform yourself. I hope that the day you get out, you are a different person." I turned and walked away with a steady stride. Julian followed me with his gaze, tears rolling down his cheeks. He understood that he had forever lost the most valuable thing in his life. 1 year later, Berlin, Germany. The auditorium of the International Congress Center was packed. Thousands of entrepreneurs, politicians, and activists from around the world had gathered for the Global Women Leaders Forum. I was on stage, under the spotlight. I wore an elegant silk dress by a Spanish designer in a deep blue. In a sea of dark suits and Western evening gowns, my attire stood out as a symbol of elegance and strength. The microphone came on. I smiled at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eleanor Hayes, Executive Vice President of Strategy for H&G Corporation." Applause thundered. I began my speech, not with economic theories, but with my life story. I spoke of the 10 years trapped by prejudice, of the days when I forgot who I was, and of the moment I decided to reclaim my voice using language, my most powerful weapon. Many people ask me what the secret to success is. I tell them, never let anyone define your worth. You are not your husband's shadow, nor an ornament in the home. You are yourselves, with your intelligence, your strength, and your own dreams. Do not be afraid to start over. Sometimes, a collapse is the beginning of an even more brilliant rebirth. The speech ended with a thunderous standing ovation. Many people were on their feet, their eyes moist. Richter came onto the stage and handed me a bouquet of flowers. He hugged me and whispered, "I am so proud of you, Eleanor." After the ceremony, I went out onto the balcony. The Berlin air was cold but pure. I watched the Spree River flow calmly. In the distance, an elegant man approached. It was Marcus, a German linguistics professor who had quietly supported me during my year in Berlin. "You were incredible, Eleanor," Marcus said in nearly perfect English, his gaze full of affection. "Are you free tonight? I know a delicious Spanish restaurant in the Mitte district." I turned and smiled at him. My heart, after so many storms, seemed to start beating again. But this time, it beat to the rhythm of freedom and equality. "I'm free, Marcus, but I'm in the mood for German food. I'm craving a good currywurst." We both laughed heartily. Our laughter mingled with the wind, rising into the vast Berlin sky. The phoenix had been reborn, and her wings were now strong enough to fly toward any horizon she desired.